You think you can do anything, but you can't. You tell me about your love, it's a bad trend. You try to kiss me, I was against. I don't like when you hold me by the waist. You can try me. My feelings flew when my dreams come true. I'll be not with you, oh boy. You'd better find yourself another toy. You can try me. There's no feeling you remember. The laugh is gone. You can try me on, it doesn't matter. You can try me on, but it's okay. Baby, there's no feeling you remember. The laugh is gone for me. You can try me. My heart beats faster just because it recalls our past relations. It's just a habit that will soon pass, I'll be sick of your actions. You can try me hard, it doesn't matter. You can try me home, but it's okay. Baby, there's no feeling you remember. The laugh is gone. You can try me.
Gridfinder is the home of sim racing leagues. Our management tools allow you to recruit drivers and monitor their ratings and live splits. Find this and more at gridfinder.com. Sign up for free today.
Hello everybody and welcome back to MSVT Racing and welcome back to the EnduroKA Winter Sim Series. If you joined us last week at Silverstone down in Northamptonshire, we've taken a trip north this time, so we are up in Leicestershire this time for round 2 at the Donington Park National Circuit. Of course, we then go to round 3, which is at Anglesey, round 4, Snetterton, round 5, Brands Hatch, and round 6 still yet to be voted on. Joining me in the commentary box this evening is Zach Sweeney, who was somewhat left high and dry, unfortunately, due to my networking issues last week, but I am back with you this week. Zach, how have you been?
It's been good. Of course, you missed an absolute banger over the course of last week, 60 minutes of Silverstone, of which you were only able to join us for about 5. But beyond that, it was an amazing race, a great start to what should be an equally great championship.
Yeah, it's really set itself up to produce some very, very close racing throughout. And of course, we are all using the EnduroKA car. So they've all got around about 68 brake horsepower, so not monumental power figures, 93 Newton meters of torque. So not necessarily what you think of when it comes to motorsport, but with every car being exactly the same, what it does produce is some very, very close racing, much like the real car as well. But qualifying has already been completed, and we do have the grid for the race this evening. Lining up on pole position is Greg Giles. He has Nathan Maximin lining up alongside. Row 2 of the grid is made up of Tom O'Farrell and Gary Preble. Mark Calver has Jamie Peters-Ennis for company on row 3. Row 4 is Bobby Simmons and Scott Thorne. And rounding out row 5 is James Armstrong and Ash Hill. Then we get back to Ben Abbott and Richard Pixley. Then it's Dan Abbott and Nick Creed. Starting in 15th is David Evans, and 16th is Colin Dunn. Lining up in 17th is Ollie Rix with Tim Parsons alongside. Andrew Greer-Hardy and Scott Pucknell make up row number 10. Row 11 is Tom Selden and James Harvey. Then it is Glenn Copeland and Mark Hancock, followed by Jake Wardle, Ben Woodhull, David Edwards, Peter Brett and Oscar Abruzzese lining up in 29th place. And there's a lot of names on there that we do need to keep an eye out for. Of course, Tom O'Farrell, definitely one to watch after a stellar performance in round number 1. Jamie Peters-Ennis, of course, very good in season 1, very good so far. In season 2, Scott Thorne, definitely no stranger to these cars. Bobby Simmons, of course, returning driver, we need to keep an eye on him. So too does Gary Preble. Colin Dunn, he spent a lot of time in this car. And we got a lot of newcomers as well, so definitely some drivers that we do need to keep an eye on throughout this evening. Donington Park itself, quite a technical circuit. It's a very fast circuit, but with lots of elevation change and a lot of braking zones. You've almost got to turn and brake, which naturally unsettles the car. I've got a feeling it's going to be some very close, but some slightly hairy racing here at round 2.
Well, that's the plan. That's the hope, obviously, with these amazing KAs, of course, as you say. Not high power, not high downforce, not exactly what you'd envision when you think about a race car, and yet they produce some of the best racing going. Of course, I think it is the fact that it is sort of so low power, so low downforce. It just becomes such a raw car in terms of it's just pure sort of just passionate racing that you get out there. Of course, as we've said, a spec series, so everyone is in the same. We've got a little while until we get racing, of course, but of course Greg Giles, P3 last time out in qualifying for Silverstone. He's put it on pole here today. Let's see if he's able to sort of convert those good qualifying results into some good race results.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I'm just looking again through how everybody sort of sets themselves up for an evening, and hopefully we can maybe delve into that with a few interviews later on this evening. But of course, qualifying, they have 3 hours to qualify on the run up to a racing evening. So the qualifying server opens at 4 p.m. GMT, so 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and it only closes 50 minutes before the race session opens. So it closes at 7 p.m. So they've got 3 hours, all running around on their own. They can't see each other. One of the joys of the simulator, but what they can do is just go out and find extra little bits and push a little bit harder to try and get a faster lap time. But of course, in between events, they can practice as much as they like on the run up towards what is only a 1 hour event, which doesn't sound like too much in the grand scheme of things, because the actual EnduroKA series, they have 5-hour races. I think 5 hours is probably one of the shorter ones, maybe 3. Then you've got 6 hours, 12 hours and a 24-hour, which this season is going to be held at Anglesey, and I've got to say it's been very well put together in the championship as well.
Life, and then the beautiful thing, again, they can get so close to their optimum pace because they can turn out as many laps as they like.
Yeah, absolutely. And whilst we were on the subject, is of course rounds that may be slightly different to the usual. Round number 4 at Snetterton, instead of it being a 60-minute race, it is 2 separate 30-minute races, so almost a sprint race format. And I mean, that's got to be sort of a scary prospect for some, because you can get into a nice rhythm and really start to push, but you know you're limited on time. But the good thing is, once one race is over, there won't be much of a break in between, so you can go straight back at it and hopefully keep that momentum. But for some, they may fall out of that rhythm, and then it's the challenge of not only sort of reapplying yourself, but getting back in that rhythm and refocusing for what may be the next sort of 30 minutes of action as well. And of course, we will take this time, obviously, to thank some of the sponsors as well. Positive Perception, of course, doing a brilliant job with all the sort of graphical work, or a lot of the deliveries that you see out there have all been made by Positive Perception. Of course, MSV and MSVT Racing, they do a brilliant job of bringing everything together and providing us this fabulous championship. So too do Gridfinder, and of course Burton Power as well, the series sponsor. So a lot of brilliant brands on board, and that just shows what overall the EnduroKA is as a brand, and how strong it is, and it's just going from strength to strength. Luckily, I've seen it from pretty much the birth of its actual championship and then the sim championship, and it's just getting stronger and stronger and carrying more momentum. I think also carrying momentum is Enduro or Ford KA prices generally, because we are seeming to get through a few in the real
life grid, well, it'd be interesting to see those that are exclusively in the sim in the EnduroKA Winter Sim Series actually taking part in the real world, just to see how accurate that crossover actually is.
Yeah, I think it is only getting closer from now on, and there's a wealth of knowledge, not only in the sim racing paddock, but in the real life paddock as well, whether they're racing or spectating or advising, or they're on the spanners, whatever it may be. MSV and MSVT championships always have a fabulously friendly paddock, very, very approachable. I can tell you that from first hand. And of course, everybody that's in the server that may be chatting throughout the week, again, a very friendly group of people. And of course, everybody that's watching, let's hope we can put on a very good show for you this evening. So as the start of the race is getting closer, of course, we do just need to keep an eye out for the lights, and it shows how important the start really is, because as we've mentioned a couple of times, and we've alluded to it, that not massive power figures, so you need to make sure that you nail the start, because if you start to bog down, it's going to leave you on the very back foot before you've even got to turn one, and that can really throw you out of your rhythm at the first hurdle. So Greg Giles on the inside, whilst it is a staggered grid, so he will be starting just slightly in front of Nathan Maximin. He just needs to make sure he manages any sort of wheel spin and any clutch slip as best as possible, and make sure he arrives at turn one first. But the lights are very shortly going to show up on screen.
Yeah, indeed, and then we'll get ourselves underway, of course, for 60 minutes of racing action here at Donington. Should be a ton of fun, and as you say, the start, incredibly important.
Yep, so the 6 lights go red, and we will keep an eye on the front row to see whereabouts the drivers arrive and in what order at turn one. So it's lights out, and the race gets underway. Immediately coming over to defend is Nathan Maximano. It's a good start from Greg Giles, as we mentioned. Tom O'Farrell jumps right the way over to the extreme right-hand side of your screen, using pit exit just to try and open the entry in towards turn one, but through red gate for the first time. Greg Giles remains in the lead, followed then by Nathan Maximano. Tom O'Farrell had a good start. We've had a couple of cars running wide. I think one of those might have been Jamie Peters. So Bobby Simmons has managed to work his way through and past. Also working his way up through the order is Mark Calver, so he's just trying to make the most of the field being
the best of starts, down 2 places into third, but all in all, well, as far as starts go, that was quite an exciting one at least.
Yeah, I think where Scott Thorne got caught out was Ollie Ricks, and somebody else towards the barrier. Can't quite pick out exactly who that is. That could be Oscar Abritsazy, unfortunately, that's found himself spinning through 360 degrees and pointing the wrong way. Yes, it was. What happened to Greg Giles, I don't know, because he disappeared out of the camera shot in the lead, and like you say, now finds himself in third place. But Tom O'Farrell, dream start. He's not only in the lead, but also a second clear now, with Nathan Maximan slowly coming under pressure from Greg Giles. But that 1 second lead will be completely put to nothing as the safety car has been deployed. Tom O'Farrell, he's got to do all that work again. Greg Giles, however, maybe a saving grace, gives him time to recompose himself from third and potentially work his way back up through those podium places.
Right, and that's the thing, is that he's been given a hard reset, essentially a lifeline really for Greg Giles. It's a case of, you didn't get a good start, all right, we're gonna give you essentially a second one. Of course, this one will be rolling as opposed to standing, but it is, you know, this is an opportunity that Giles can't really pass up. He did the hard work, of course. He got that pole position. He didn't quite have the brute strength to keep it, as that is awkward under the safety car. Not entirely sure as to how that's happened amongst a number of different drivers. Pixley, Edwards, Woodall, and Creed, I think all a couple of people that were involved in that. Maybe slamming on to sort of bring it down to the safety car pace as such, caught a couple of people out.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether, I mean, Nick Creed, apologies if I'm wrong, but it seemed like he maybe just got caught out by everybody sort of closing up together as they did match the safety car speed. And Ben Woodall, I think, got just caught out in Nick Creed's mistake. It looks like everybody's got back going once again, but also something that we've not mentioned, of course, we saw Ollie Ricks get a poor start. Oscar Abritsazy made a mistake, and of course Scott Thorne who found himself pointing towards the barrier. That's given those 3 drivers that were caught up in lap 1 incidents, again, a saving grace. It's throwing them a lifeline, meaning that they can close up to the tail end of the order, albeit, 15, 20 places back from where they would like to be. It means that whilst everyone is congested, we may see them carving their way back up through the order. So we'll keep an eye on the safety car lights. If they do extinguish now, we should be able to get back going. That's another mistake. That looks like Armstrong. Yeah, James Armstrong found himself on the grass, unfortunately, this time. So safety car lights still on. You'd expect another lap under the safety car, maybe just to get everybody calmed down and back in their relative positions. Nathan Maximan using all of the curbs in a little bit more. He's really starting to, I think, fill the mirrors of Tom O'Farrell, almost playing mind games, saying, once this goes back green, I will be with you, and I'm not going to be taking any prisoners. Another spin in the background for Nathan Woodall again. So I think another lap underneath the safety car is probably the best way to go, because it just gets everybody calmed down and get them ready to go back racing again.
Yeah, probably the best way to go about things. But of course, for those at the front, obviously the O'Farrell, Maximin, Giles, the sort of the front 5 really, they've just had that, I'm going for that lead, whether you like it or not. So the ball's in your court, mate. You've got to be looking out for me. You better hope that you're on top game off the start of this, or the restart of this race, I suppose. And Maximin has to really make the most of this opportunity, because if there's one thing we learned from Silverstone, it's that you do not let Tom O'Farrell get a gap.
No, because as soon as he gets it, he manages the gap very, very well. He might not run away as quickly as he would like, but the gap management that we saw from Tom O'Farrell at Silverstone was very, very impressive indeed. And one thing to throw into the mix, they won't just be playing on one driver or the other, it will be playing on everybody's minds. They still have a mandatory pit stop to serve, and whilst the pit window isn't open, it will open in 4 minutes and 30 seconds time. It remains open until we are 10 minutes away from the checkered flag. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. By the looks of that, Nathan Maximan, even with the flash of the lights, just to try and play a bit more mind game. Safety car lights are off, so everything points the way of Tom O'Farrell. He is now in charge of the pace of the order and in charge of when we get this race back underway. So the tail end of the train still working its way over the blind right-hander of Coppice Corner. So Scott Thorne still not gone, almost at the bottom end of the Dunlop Straight now, the Starkey Straight as it is commonly dubbed, and then in towards the right and left at the S's. We will get this race back underway. So Tom O'Farrell, has he gone? Yes, he has. Flicks the car into the right, uses all the curb, flicks the car into the left, and he's already trying to make the most of the position that he was in. However, Nathan Maximan gets a very, very good run on the exit of the S's. Very, very quick exit indeed. Up through the gears he will go, puts the car on the left-hand side, holds Tom O'Farrell towards the right-hand side of the circuit just to make sure he doesn't open up the entry. Now you see him flick right, use all of the circuit available, but it wasn't enough. Tom O'Farrell remains in the lead. Nathan Maximan really starting to push him forward, push him physically as well. A flick of oversteer, but Tom O'Farrell remains in the lead. Nathan Maximan potentially losing time there in second, because Greg Giles has got the best seats in the house and he's watching along. Mark Albert will just be hoping to stick with them, because he's got quite a handsome margin between himself and last season's champion, Bobby Simmons.
Yeah, nice healthy gap, just allows him to manage it really and sort of negotiate this front three battle really nicely, because usually it's difficult to set up moves when you're under pressure from behind. But the obviously the luxury that Calver's got is that he's not under too much pressure from Simmons as of yet. So if something happens in front, he can set himself up really nicely to benefit. Tom O'Farrell really as well, negotiating this first lap off the restart nicely as well, parking it on the inside of turn 1 at Redgate just to limit the chance of an up and under from Nathan Maximan, and so far leads fairly comfortably. Now it's going to be the case of, whilst he's not under pressure, to use his speed, get a gap and try and manage it, as we know he does so well, and hope potentially that the likes of Greg Giles and Calver put some pressure onto Maximin so O'Farrell can build a nice little bit of a safety net from behind.
Yeah, it seems like that's slowly starting to happen, almost up to half a second. There's a lot of changing in the order further down. Colin Dunn has managed to get himself through and past Brett up in towards 12th place. So Colin Dunn trying to work his way even closer towards the top 10. Some bigger margins further back. Dan Abbott has dropped 1.6 seconds away from Jamie Peters-Ennis. So he's got a bit of work to do if he wants to try and carve his way back through and up the order. I think there was a mistake in the background with the car pointing the wrong way, but I think it's all been collected up as well. But Tom O'Farrell, he's already set the personal fastest lap of the race, the overall fastest lap of the race. We've had a spinner in the background. That is car number 19. Let's try and pick out exactly who that is. I can't see it from first glance, but we'll be able to try it. I think I'll pick that up in just a few moments' time. But Tom O'Farrell has done a very good job indeed. There is James Armstrong. He's under pressure from Peter Brett behind now. That is for 12th place. I think we could have had Ollie Ricks drop further down the order. Oscar Abbassese, bearing in mind we saw him pointing backwards, he's already back up towards 25th place, so he's slowly chipping away at those cars up the road.
Yeah, and that's the way you've got to treat it, really. I mean, as we say, you got given that lifeline with the safety car restart, everyone bunched up, and now while they're still bunched up before the race settles down and the gaps start to spread, that's when you make the most moves. You take each car as they come, you use each car as a stepping stone, and you ride the wave of carnage and chaos in the opening moments, side by side, potentially with Simmons under a little bit of pressure from Breville in that fight for the top 5. Simmons not off to the best of starts in terms of qualifying results as the reigning champion, but his consistency is what gets him decent results. P3, of course, last time out at Silverstone, at the moment running inside the top 5, running really nicely. A fight for second as well into that final chicane. Maximin versus Giles.
Yeah, so Giles on the very, very inside, tries to keep the door open, manages to make it work and elbows his way through and past Nathan Maximin for second place, but washes wide, bounces over the curb, even onto a little bit of grass. So everything throws the way of Nathan Maximin, or does it, because now that is Calvert, who's jumped his way right the way over to the outside. It will be the outside for turn 1 as well, but he's got to try and make this work. He's almost been ever the optimist, and we're now 3 wide, heading in towards turn 1, and it's with Bobby Simmons. Gary Preble with a big moment in the background. I don't think he got that collected up. And Ben Abbott manages to get away with it, but Bobby Simmons, yes, he was pointing the wrong way there on the exit of Schwantz Curve. I think the car that we saw pointing the wrong way at the start of this lap was unfortunately Colin Dunn, one of the drivers I mentioned, who just promoted himself up to 12th place, now right the way down in 27th. But what a change at the front. Tom O'Farrell still leading from Greg Giles. Nathan Maximin still somehow holds on to 3rd place. Mark Calver in 4th, Bobby Simmons 5th, and Ben Abbott in 6th.
I think we've set the scene for what should be a very interesting race. I think this backs that point entirely. A little bit of a fight further back, I believe, just in behind where Preble rejoined, caused a little bit of calamity. Nice little up and under potentially from Harvey to look to the inside of Nick Creed. And then also we've got Peter Zennis through the final chicane as well, under a little bit of pressure from Ash Hill, who's trying to launch a counter-attack even. It's Peter Zennis that got that position back. Now Ash Hill launching the up and under, going into turn 1 here at Redgate. Also 3 wide potentially into the chicane at the end of the lap. We're going to see Greg Giles potentially, of course, after, or well, a little bit further back actually, this Nick Creed versus Harvey into the chicane. A car facing backwards, unfortunately, not entirely sure as to who that is at this stage. Peter Zennis still under pressure from Ash Hill, and we've got 50 more minutes left of this, Jack.
I'm trying to figure out exactly who that was pointing the wrong way. I think it was Scott Pucknell, unfortunately, that bounced over the curb. It unsettled the car and he found himself, like you say, pointing the wrong way. But Jamie Petersen is somehow holding on to what is 6th place. Ash Hill threw everything at it on the way in towards turn 1. Couldn't quite make it work. Washes wide at the apex on the exit of the old hairpin, and then uses all of the track and even a bit of grass just to try and get that moment collected up. All that time he gained, he's now lost and fallen into the grasp of Ben and Dan Abbott in 8th and 9th, so he could be eaten up by both of the Burton power cars here. So Jamie Petersen has got away with that one rather lightly. Bobby Simmons has managed to work his way through and past Mark Calver for 4th place. Ash Hill has indeed dropped back, so Ben Abbott has got by. Dan Abbott is still trying to keep that door open as we approach Coppice Corner, but I think it will be Ben Abbott remaining in 7th. Ash Hill just about holding on to 8th place, down through the car at the inside with armfuls of opposite lock, managed to get any sort of oversteer squared away. Now coming over to the extreme right-hand side of the circuit is Ash Hill and Ben Abbott trying to defend, but Ash Hill has managed to work his way alongside. It will be the inside as we head towards the S's, so over the crest we go, jump on the brakes, down a gear potentially, and just avoid too much curb. I think Ben Abbott got caught out. Dan Abbott definitely did, so Ben Abbott down into 8th place once again. Dan Abbott in 9th, and for the moment Richard Pixley is trying to, I think, figure out exactly what he's got himself in for, because he's jumped onto the back of a battle which he really doesn't need to be part of. He just wants to focus forward and try and pick up further places if they continue to battle. James Armstrong waiting in the wings in 11th.
And that's the problem, is the fact that you have to think long term. Again, it's not quite to the same level of an endurance race as it would be in real life, but you still have to think long term, and fighting as hard as these guys are here through Hollywood into the Craner curves. Of course, Ben Abbott on the inside of Ash Hill turns to the outside when they reach the next left-hander. It's a very high demanding corner in terms of lateral grip, but it gives him the inside for the old hairpin. Later on the brakes, but the outside line there from Ash Hill sweeps his way through to try and retain 7th place, nearly onto the grass. Well, in fact, taking a healthy dose of the grass, it must be said. Still side by side as they run their way up towards McLean's through and up, of course, up this hill. In the background as well, you've got Dan Abbott trying to put some pressure on, maybe searching for that inside line, and he does. He's later on the brakes, nips his way through, but once again, Hill confident in the agility of that EnduroKA, but pushed wide ever so slightly by Abbott.
Yeah, so Abbott up the inside at McLean's corner. So both the Abbotts have now worked their way through and past Ash Hill. So Ben Abbott is up into 7th, Dan Abbott in 8th, and Ash Hill now down in 9th. James Armstrong and Richard Pixley continue to battle away in the background. In fact, they have swapped around, so James Armstrong has now managed to work his way up in towards 11th place. All of this battling is not just costing them time, but it's costing them track limits as well. They have to be so careful. I think it's the first 2 that they can get away with in terms of track limits. Anything further will then be down for steward's review. Yeah, so the first 2 infringements are in inverted commas free and will not result in a penalty. A third infringement will incur a 5-second penalty, and every subsequent infringement will incur and he's really starting to close up on our race leader, Tom O'Farrell.
Yeah, so it just goes to show that Giles, of course, does have that pace. Maybe just suffers in the opening stages or the densely packed scenarios of a race. The race starts, safety car restarts as such as, oh my goodness me, I think that's Evans going round off the exit. Indeed, it is in the background as well. Another driver, or it might have just been the same mistake from Evans, unfortunately, seeing him round. So Ollie Ricks gets promoted another place into 16th. There he is, David Evans, doing the slow climb of shame up towards McLean's as he struggles to get that KA back up to racing speed. But that's the thing, is that there's been so many mistakes, but it's understandable because Donington is such a tricky technical circuit, and honestly, I'm surprised we've not seen more.
Yeah, David Evans, unfortunately, losing out there in one of the Semprini cars, just dipped a wheel onto the grass, and it meant it over-rotated the car on the exit of the old hairpin, but everyone's been fairly well behaved through there. Scott Thorne now looking up the inside of Glenn Copeland, so he might just be able to force the door open. Yes, he is much later on the brakes, uses all of the curb. He washes wide at the second. That could compromise his exit, so Glenn Copeland might have a second bite of the cherry here as we head back down the start-finish straight. Of course, the pit window is open, so if you see a battle slowly starting to commence, why wouldn't you dive into the pit lane? And Glenn Copeland, as if he'd planned it, into the pit lane to serve his mandatory pit stop, so he's decided he doesn't want to lose any time battling Scott Thorne. He can jump into the pit lane, pick up any sort of fuel or repairs that may be required, then he can retake to the circuit and just lap and lap and lap all the way to the end. It's becoming an ever busier place, is the pit lane, because David Evans into the pit lane after making a mistake on the lap prior as well. We did pick up Ollie Ricks. He's sat there in 15th place, not too far away from Scott Thorne at the moment. What a brilliant comeback drive it's been from him so far. Another driver looking for a comeback drive is Oscar Abruzzese. We saw him pointing the wrong way, I think under the safety car potentially. There's a big screech of tyres as we head down towards the old hairpin. Jake Wardle lost a couple of places, and I think he was the cause of the screech of tyres. Whether he's washed wide or spun through 360 degrees, I don't know. There is Ash Hill, having fought away with the Abbotts, Ben and Dan. He's now slowly coming under pressure from James Armstrong. He just can't quite catch the break that I think he wants.
No, he's had a very action-packed first few laps in this race, of course, so it might be worth thinking about, as you say, just coming into the pit lane, avoiding that battle in its entirety. If you can get a few laps just in some clear air, you can run nicely, you can avoid the war zone that currently is the mid-pack and the entire pack, really, of this race. And just, again, as I say, run by yourself. Swap position, Mark Calvert moves his way up into P5 ahead of Jamie Peters-Ennis, now down to 6th. But yeah, while the pit window is open, it might be worth thinking about a bit of a send going into turn 1. Definitely having a look at that inside as Calvert takes a very wide line going in. Peters-Ennis thought about the counter-attack, and it has actually sent Calvert wide. So a little bit of a dummy move, potentially forcing a bit of a mistake from the man now in P5, but nothing major in of itself. The problem, however, that I would have with coming in so early is that if you do change tyres, they're going to be very, very warm by the time we get to the end of the race.
Yeah, you're going to have to manage the tyres very well indeed. So if you almost want to get the most out of it, just pit around about halfway through, and you should keep the car fairly equal. Here is Oscar Abruzzese. He's now looking up the inside of Colin Dunn. Later on the brakes, picks up the inside on the run in towards turn 1, and Oscar now up into 20th place. We did see, I'm not sure who it was that was pointing the wrong way. I think it was Tim Parsons on the exit of the final corner. Unfortunately, once again spinning. Oscar Abruzzese has got to go from attack to defence straight away because Colin Dunn is already trying to carve his way back through and past. It's the outside as we head down the Craner curves, and then in towards the old hairpin. It will be the inside for Colin Dunn, but Oscar manages to flick the car in. Will he get his stop before he meets the grass? No, he won't. So that will cost him a lot of momentum as we climb back up through Schwantz curve, and Colin Dunn does just about manage to hold on to 20th place. When we saw Jamie Peters-Ennis fighting away with Mark Calver, those two were swapping around consistently as we went down the Dunlop straight in towards the S's. Jamie Peters-Ennis arrived first, but bouncing over the curbs, lost all his momentum, and Mark Calver managed to pick up 5th place and has already tried to extend that margin almost up to half a second. A gap that's going down, that lead battle. Once again, it's come down ever more. Last time we saw it, it was 1.5 seconds. This time, 7/10.
Yeah, not really much in it whatsoever. So Giles has done a really good job, as unfortunately Abruzzese hasn't done as good of a one through Coppice, a little bit wide, caning all of the keyword there, momentum. With such low power cars, you have to keep that minimum speed up, otherwise it is so easy to just be a sitting duck on the straight for the rest of the pack. In what is such a competitive pack as well, you can very easily lose 2, 3, 4, maybe even more places just from one small mistake that canes your speed on the exit of a corner. But for the most part, these guys at front have been doing a really good job as to keep their minimum speed up and give us some amazing racing. 20 minutes through, of course, already 40 to go and 30 left of that pit window. Ben Abbott on the back of Peter Zennis and Calver. A fight for the top 5, which isn't bad going.
No, not at all. I've got to say, very impressed with Ben Abbott at the moment, because he managed to work his way through and past Ash Hill, bringing with him Dan Abbott, but he's almost forgotten about his namesake and just sort of driven away at this point, and he's really closed up on Jamie Peter-Zennis and arrived at a battle that was already happening between Jamie Peter-Zennis and Mark Calver. They now have to try and figure out what they're going to do when they arrive at the S's. So Mark Calver again over to the extreme right-hand side of the circuit to try and defend and close the gap between himself and Jamie Peter-Zennis, just to make sure Jamie can't quite spot the apex, has to go the long way round, tries to hang it around the outside on the brakes. It almost works, a bit of contact between the pair of them, but remain as they are. Everything now pendulums the way of Ben Abbott, because he gets a brilliant run out of the final corner. He tries to close up in the aerodynamic assistance. Jamie Peter-Zennis still attacking, goes over to the extreme left-hand side of the circuit and will try and use pit exit to maximise the entry in towards Redgate. Ben Abbott shows him definitely how to does it and uses it all. Absolutely side by side, trading a bit of paint, somehow still side by side, and Mark Calver remains in front for 5th. Jamie Peter-Zennis still alongside. It will be the outside as we work our way through Hollywood, the inside at Craner Curves, but I think more importantly it will be the outside for the old hairpin. So you'd say in the more secure position at the moment is Mark Calver, but if Jamie can manage the grip on the outside, which I think was almost hampered slightly by a bit of contact between himself and Mark Calver, he can't quite get this one together. Ben Abbott, he's just going to be watching this and rubbing his hands together, hoping it all goes wrong and he can pick up 5th place.
Yeah, that's the thing about being the 3rd car in a 3-car train. You are in such a good position in terms of control, able to put that pressure on the 2 in front, side by side. Peter Zennis not going to back out of the fight. The space opens up potentially for Abbott on the inside to follow through, but Calvin not going down without fighting around the outside as they run their way through. McLean's now up the hill towards Coppice, a blind apex corner as well, side by side in the background. I think Hill getting a little bit argy-bargy with the other Abbott, side by side through. Calvin trying to go the long way round of a very long corner. It doesn't work out for him. Onto the grass, onto the gravel. It's now a 2-horse race in the fight for 5th.
Yeah, so what's going to happen now is, of course, that means Mark Calver will drop back into the grasp of Ash Hill, Dan Abbott and Richard Pixley, who were all fighting away. Ash Hill, like you say, just into the back of Dan Abbott slightly, which over-rotated the car on the exit. So in towards the S's now, Jamie Peter-Zennis in 5th place. Bouncing over the curbs in the background is Ben Abbott, gets a brilliant run as they go on to the start-finish straight. Ash Hill does indeed pick the pocket of Dan Abbott as we go on to the start-finish straight. Needs to be careful, though, because Richard Pixley isn't too far away either. Jamie Peter-Zennis putting the car in the middle of the road. He will decide whether he goes left, right, or stays where he is to try and defend. But for the moment, Ben Abbott, he's just waiting in the wings, pushing Jamie Peter-Zennis around and waiting for that opportunity to present itself. Or is he going to try and force that mistake, keep that pressure on, force a mistake, or dive into the pit lane? Everything, like you say, is in the hands of Ben Abbott. He is in control of this little battle for the moment. Down the hill, a bit of contact, a bit of a wobble. Ash Hill now under pressure from Richard Pixley. Dan Abbott has indeed lost out to Richard Pixley, so we're side by side back down the Craner Curves. Ash Hill will be on the inside as we arrive at the old hairpin. Richard Pixley will be on the outside. Dan Abbott on the even more inside, bounces over the curb, bouncing over the grass. He's got to be careful of picking up any sort of track limits warnings there. Ash Hill, he's got everything to do in the way of defence, somehow holding on to 7th place, but by the slenderest of margins.
Yeah, he's been an absolute hero in terms of his defence, putting up such a valiant wall ahead of the rest of the pack who are trying so hard to dethrone him for that 7th place. Richard Pixley trying to go the long way round, but in doing so opens the door for Calver to just follow a racing line essentially, and in doing so has materialised an overtaking opportunity. Now Pixley stuck to the left, and that could open the door for Dan Abbott to follow through on the inside. Indeed it has. Pixley just got to be careful to manage the understeer because it just goes and goes and goes. That car just does not want to turn through such a long corner, but I think he's just been able to settle into 9th place. Now, of course, down this back straight, using a healthy dose of the slipstream, which will help a little bit in these KOs. Not an extensive amount, but into the chicane, of course, quite a heavy braking zone for these cars. Who's going to be the one to come out on top side by side? Dan Abbott finds his way through. Pixley over the curbs. There's a bit of contact between the pair of them and just completely pushes Abbott off the road.
Yeah, bouncing over the curbs, he completely lost the contact patch with the ground, meaning that he was pretty much a passenger into the side of Dan Abbott. So with all of that battling between Mark Calver, Richard Pixley and Dan Abbott, that has allowed Ash Hill to run away a little bit and just put a bit of breathing room between himself and that trio behind. For the moment, Greg Giles is really starting to close up within half a second now, almost, of Tom O'Farrell. So 14 laps completed onto the 15th. We've still got 25 minutes of the pit window, 35 minutes of the race, so the complexion of this race could completely change. Oscar Abbott-Sazy picking up another place, working his way through and past Scott Pucknell for what is 21st place. Glenn Copeland has followed through as well, so maybe a mistake there from Scott Pucknell. But one thing that is slowly going to become an ever-increasing issue, as we're seeing firsthand now with Scott Thorne, traffic. It's you've got to manage it. You are in charge. You've got to. It's that faster car's job to try and work its way through and past any sort of traffic. But this time we are seeing how that can more or less compromise a lead battle, because Greg Giles is alongside. It will be the outside as we head in towards the S's. Scott Thorne later on the brakes uses a bit more curb. Will that maximise the exit for Greg Giles? Maybe not. Very, very equal as we head onto the start-finish straight once again. Will either of them dive into the pit lane? No, not this time. But those top two absolutely glued together, and if they continue to battle, now they are together, do not rule out Nathan Maximan and maybe even Bobby Simmons in the background.
And that's why they've got to be so careful. I think Greg Giles is showing his intentions very clearly, looking to go to the inside of turn 1 here at Redgate. Doesn't quite manage to do so, but definitely, as I say, just showing his nose, playing that psychological game with O'Farrell. But maybe it's not wise. They've both got the pace. They're both quicker than the rest of the field. Use it. Why not? Just for the next 5-10 minutes, build out a 5, 6, 7 second gap to the rest of the pack and then battle. Because all they're going to do from now, right now, P1, P2, they're going to trade places. They're fairly equal on pace. It's not going to mean a lot at this stage. It's more just the novelty of leading the race. It's going to continue to swap the more they battle. The only thing that is going to be is that, yeah, Greg Giles could lead for a little bit. He'll still have O'Farrell on his tail. He might not still win, but he will have the added threat of Maximan and Simmons, maybe even Peter Zennis if it gets that extreme. And he's just going to add more variables to the equation that he doesn't want. He wants this to be a completely isolated 1v1 fight with O'Farrell. But I think he's just a racing driver. I think he's going to want to go for that lead.
Well, we're seeing it now. Yes, he has jumped up the inside on the exit of Coppice Corner, so back down the Starkey Straight we will go, and Greg Giles is only going to pull further and further alongside by the time we arrive at the S's, because we saw a small mistake from him on the exit of the old hairpin, but that allowed him to recompose himself and nail the next sector as we go through the chicane. Absolutely cut off the nose, did Tom O'Farrell. So Greg Giles, with any sort of overspeed that he had, it really didn't go his way. So deciding to do, I think, maybe the slightly more clever thing with a spirited entry in towards pit entry. Of course, he does dive in to take his mandatory pit stop, and that will drop him down the order. But then everything goes back the way of Tom O'Farrell, because he's now got to focus on putting in some very clean, some very consistent lap times, and then decide when he dives into the pit lane. Greg Giles back rolling. He will fall in behind Ash Hill, Mark Calvert, Dan Abbott, maybe even James Armstrong as well, but there's a field of cars arriving. That's the last thing Greg Giles wants. He doesn't want to arrive back on the circuit in a battle for what will be position. So the drivers that he will arrive amongst will have every single right to battle away with Greg Giles and potentially cost him a little bit of time and hamper his progress on Tom O'Farrell.
Right, yeah, and that's the risk you take with pitting slightly earlier than the rest of the pack, is the fact that you are more than likely going to come out right in the mix of it. Of course, we've got Ash Hill here fighting still in the battle for what is now 6th place behind Richard Pixley. He makes up the 3rd car in this train. Greg Giles, well, there he is. He's got incredibly unlucky with that one, because this is such a hard-fought fight. It's going to be so difficult to negotiate it. He's going to need such a big overlap in terms of raw pace, and then probably a little bit of luck is to not get involved in any carnage, chaos and incidents that come with it. Right now, though, O'Farrell is clear. He's got a free track ahead of him to run at O'Farrell pace, whereas Greg Giles is amongst the war zone, hoping to just limit the damage, essentially, with that gap. It might not have been the best idea to come into the pits.
No, of course, we know what Ash Hill's defending is like. He's a very, very strong defender and a very, very tricky driver to pass. And Greg Giles has now got to try and figure that out, as he is stuck behind Ash Hill. Once he's got past Ash Hill, he's got Mark Calver and Richard Pixley. The next car Tom O'Farrell will meet will be Tim Parsons in 24th place to put a lap on Tim. That is, unless Tim Tom gets close enough and decides this is the time, dive into the pit lane, minimise any time loss behind a lapped car. We get ever closer to the halfway point in this race, but Ash Hill, he has managed to work his way through and past Mark Calver, so maybe a mistake from Mark there. But Greg Giles, he's still got to try and work his way through and past those cars up the road. But behind Greg is Dan Abbott. He's getting closer. He's trying to become part of this battle. I think Greg is now just got to focus on trying working his way through very cleanly. Not quite what he would have wanted with Mark Calver running wide, so that opens the door for Greg. But of course, he's now got to fight his way away from the cars behind and up towards Ash Hill. So it's a busy job, and like you say, very unfortunate for Greg.
And not only does he have to get away from the cars behind, but he has to make sure that he passes Ash Hill quick enough as to not allow them to recatch once again. There's a car off in the infield once again. Just got a very quick glimpse of the EnduroKA in the background. But yeah, Greg Giles using his pace very wisely. And again, he's got to be clean as to limit, you know, damage or incidents, but also sort of minimise the likelihood of track limits as well. You only get 2 warnings, as we've said, and around Donington, which is a fairly easy track to extend the limits, it's not a lot. So Greg Giles, of course, in this very high intensity scenario that he's in, trying to not only manage the gap for the net lead with Tom O'Farrell, but also carve his way up into the lead of this train. He's got to be careful not to extend the track limits because, you know, 5-second penalties, they very quickly add up. And right now, a 5-second penalty would hamper pretty much all of his progress and ruin most chances he has for the lead.
Yeah, he's got a lot to think about, and he's put himself in quite a tricky position there, has Greg Giles. The car we saw on the inside of the old hairpin was Ben Woodall. He's currently down in 26th place, so a rotten race from Ben at the moment. I'm sure he's hoping for something new or maybe something to change in the final half of this race. We have ticked past the halfway point, so we've got 29 minutes or just under half an hour of this race remaining. Mark Calver still sat there trying to defend from Dan Abbott. He's got James Armstrong not too far behind, so we could see once again a trio fighting away. Not sure what it is about EnduroKAs, but they seem to hunt in threes for the moment. Ben Abbott is now trying to reapply himself onto the tail end of Jamie Peters-Ennis, so that's the battle for 4th place. Up the hill they go, both of them running wide and just jumping on towards the grass, and that is a danger of following a car, because if you almost become hyper focused on that car up the road, if they make a mistake, 9 times out of 10 you will make the absolute identical mistake. Watch yourself run wide, and then what could have been a brilliant opportunity to overtake, you're back in the position you were prior to that mistake.
Yeah, it's so easy to, you know, tunnel vision the car in front, and in some cases it's a help. It helps you to sort of, I don't know what it is, but I sort of tested it in my local car track. We did laps just completely by ourselves, and then a lap chasing another car, and when you were chasing, something happened that just allowed you to find an extra couple of attempts. I assume probably just because of the stakes of it. You want to go and catch that car. The competitive nature in you as a racing driver forces you to find more time to go and catch them. So of course you do have to be, you know, mindful, you know, you want to extract that extra performance, but also, as you say, the tunnel vision. They make a mistake, you make a mistake, especially when you're running so close behind them. You essentially just follow the exact same thing that they're doing, their lines, their braking points, which is understandable to an extent. But if you want to get past them, you have to be doing something different than them, because if you're doing the exact same thing, you're only going to be running at their pace anyway.
Yeah, it's a very sort of tricky aspect of a battle to try and work your head around. But one thing you can do, as long as you don't go into the battle sort of with naivety, or you go in narrow-minded, what you can do behind a car is maybe learn something, because they might take a very slightly different line and they pull away from you each lap. So if you go on the next lap, you know what, I'm going to try that, and you find out it's quicker, you can find yourself an ever-increasing, almost an even more dangerous force to be reckoned with going in towards a battle. Greg Giles still trapped up behind Ash Hill in 7th place at the moment. The fastest lap so far does indeed go the way of Greg Giles, a 1:33.061, having been into the pit lane, and he's now trapped behind Ash Hill. He's posting, what, 1:34.291 last time through, compared to Tom O'Farrell's 1:33.829. So Tom O'Farrell's lead is only extending. Whilst on track it will be tricky to visualize, the timing screen doesn't lie, so Tom O'Farrell will continue to pull away, and he is doing so away from Nathan Maximan. Back down the straight we will go, past the exhibition centre on the right hand side of the screen, in towards the S's once again. Ben Abbott, he's running out of tools to use here, because as soon as he tries to force the door open, it doesn't quite work. Jamie Peters-Ennis places the car exactly where he needs to make sure Ben Abbott can't force the mistake or work his way through. Or has there been conversations prior to this race and they're going to work together, because he's very, very close indeed, but I haven't seen him go for any sort of substantial moves or maybe late braking opportunities or just trying to fill the mirrors. He seems very comfortable behind Jamie Peters-Ennis. Are they trying to work together and close up on Bobby Simmons up the road?
Potentially so. This could well be a showcase of some brilliant racecraft, because at the moment they're sort of suspended just between the fight in front and the fight behind, and not really much else is going on. If they fight, all they're going to do is open the gap up in front and potentially allow Richard Pixley to close in behind as well. And all they'll do for the next 26 minutes is fight amongst themselves anyway. There's not really going to be any net gain probably until the final lap where things actually settle and they cross the line. They're both running at the same pace, so why not just hunker down, see what you can do? That 7.5 second gap to Simmons for the podium. You know, Simmons could make a mistake, pit stops and things like that can still come into to play. So why not just work together for a little while, see how it goes? If you're not closing, then by all means fight, because at the end of the day, that's track position. It's points that you want on your championship standings. But yeah, there's no real need to be fighting tooth and nail for the moment. They might not even be working together either. It might just be Ben Abbott not overly confident in going for that move on Peter Zennis, who is, to be fair, parking that car fairly flawlessly.
Yeah, and of course both of these drivers still have to dive into the pit lane. So there's still a lot to worry about and a lot to sort of bear in mind as we get closer towards the sort of 25-minute mark. Drivers that have already been into the pit lane. So Greg Giles has been in. So too has Ollie Ricks. So too, who is that further down the order? Colin Dunn has been in. As well as Nick Creed and Glenn Copeland and pretty much everybody else thereafter still has or has been into the pit lane. The top 6 still yet to pit. So Greg Giles, in theory, at the head of affairs when it comes in towards drivers that have been into the pit lane, returning to the circuit. Couldn't quite pick out exactly who that was. I think that could have been Jake Wardle, one of the laps cars retaking to the circuit, and that's something to bear in mind, because you might have come out like Greg Giles behind a pack of cars, and you go, right, okay, I've got away with that one now. I've worked my way through and past everybody else that I needed to, and now I can focus. But if you get a laps car returning from the pit lane, it might just cost you a couple of tenths heading in towards turn 1, but that can massively magnify the job that you have at hand to try and catch, in this case, Tom Farrell. And Tom O'Farrell is doing a brilliant job at the head of affairs. 4.1 seconds clear now of Nathan Maximum. Bobby Simmons, we saw it last season, we're seeing it again this season. Consistency wins championships. That's exactly what Bobby Simmons did last season, and it's what he's hoping to do this season. And third place is a good haul of points and exactly what he will need. I'm sure he would be hoping for a few more and maybe take to the top set of the podium. Ben Abbott is still sat there in 5th place, holding station with Jamie Peters-Ennis in 4th. Richard Pixley is just up the road. He is got, I think that's Oscar Abbott-Sazy between himself and the car behind of Greg Giles. Then we get back to Ash Hill, who is still fighting with Mark Calver. He's had a quicker car carve their way through that battle in the way of Greg Giles, and still Ash Hill just cannot escape the grasp of Mark Calver.
You can't. Of course, there's Greg Giles getting past that lapped car, I believe, into the pit lane as well in the background. Mark Calver trying to get away, I think, from Ash Hill ever so slightly, just to again have a couple of laps in some clear air. Scott Pucknell a little bit further back, just checking in with the lower end of the top 20. Three-way fight here behind Copeland. We've then got, of course, Evans, and then the car we're following here of Pucknell, who's 3rd place in this 3-car train. They're going to fly in formation in towards Coppice Corner here. This long right-hander side by side as Copeland goes a little bit wide. Evans nips his way through into 17th. Scott Pucknell then going to try and search for a gap as well, getting very aggressive and squeezing his way through. It wasn't until the last second that Copeland decided to give him just that little bit of tolerance and space on the inside. Now as they run their way towards the S, who's going to be the braver one on the brakes? At the moment, I believe Pucknell's got the overlap, but not quite the bravery on the brakes. And for now, Copeland keeps that 18th place.
It does indeed. It was very late on the brakes, but all of this battling, I've just been watching the timing screen. Gary Preble has been getting closer and closer. No stranger to real-life racing either. Gary is very experienced behind the wheel of a racing car, and he will try and apply everything that he's learned, not only in the simulator but on the real-life circuit as well. But all of this battling between Glenn Copeland, Scott Pucknell, Colin Dunn is there. David Evans has just worked his way through and past Colin Dunn for 16th place. So the battle goes from David Evans, Colin Dunn, Glenn Copeland, Scott Pucknell, Gary Preble, Tom Selden is almost there, and Andrew Greer-Hardy really isn't too far away either. There's contact between Scott Pucknell and I think that was Glenn Copeland. We saw, like you say, that very aggressive defence, and he's being bullied a little bit there is Scott Pucknell. Very well collected up. A bit of an oversteery moment as we head down the Craner curves through the old hairpin. Weaves the battle, but unfortunately Scott Pucknell, he's gone from what was, I think, 18th place right the way down to what is now 19th, and there's further contact. Spinning through 180 degrees is Tom Selden. Hopefully he gets that car slowed down before the barrier, but Scott Pucknell, that pretty much went from bad to worse and then to better again, because he's up into 19th place. Andrew Greer-Hardy up into 20th. Glenn Copeland, it all came undone. He went for one move, he's down into 21st. Tom Selden does get that car pointing the right way and back on the circuit.
Side by side here as well, immediately thrown into it. Ben Abbott now trying to spark a move in this fight for fourth with Peter Zennis. He's going to go to the outside of the next left, but the inside then by the time they reach the right-hander here at McLean's. It's the inside that really does reign supreme, but the up and under, look at that sweeping momentum that Peter Zennis has got. And now the uphill climb, the momentum is going to swing the way of the blue and pink KA on the left-hand side of your screen, the right-hand side of the circuit, and more crucially, the inside line for the next corner. Ben Abbott, though, going to give it a good go to the outside, use the agility and keep his foot in really nicely, very well held, it must be said. Very difficult to do, but he's now got to do it all over again by the time they reach the next chicane. Of course, Peter Zennis got the advantage on the inside. He's going to be able to hold firm and claim the corner by the time they reach the braking zone, but what a fight this is for fourth.
Yeah, Ben Abbott, he's got to go the really long way round in towards the S's. He manages to hold it, gets the car slowed down, bounces over the curbs. He was just about able to rejoin the circuit without making contact with Jamie Peters-Ennis, and you could see there the almost spatial awareness. As soon as he got back on the circuit, he wound a load of left-hand lock on just to try and keep away from Jamie Peters-Ennis and avoid that accident. But all of this battling is meaning that Greg Giles will be closing up. Of course, these two drivers still yet to pit. Tom O'Farrell has been into the pit lane, our race leader, so he is only dropped down to third place, and now we can see just how much time Greg Giles has lost. He was only, what, 2/10 back from Tom O'Farrell when they went into the pit lane. Now Tom O'Farrell has been into the pit lane. We can get a more visual reference in terms of whereabouts Greg Giles and Tom O'Farrell will fall in. I'd say that's probably north of, what, 10 seconds now, unfortunately. So Tom O'Farrell picking up the left-hand curb as we climb the hill at Schwann's Curve. Whereabouts is Greg Giles? I think he's just on the exit of the old hairpin. So there is the margin between the pair of them. Now Greg Giles goes through Schwann's Curve, so you can see just how much time he lost battling away with Ash Hill, Richard Pixley, Dan Abbott, and Ollie Ricks, one of the drivers we were keeping an eye on, got caught up in a lap 1 incident. He's up into the very edge of the top 10 and has been into the pit lane. So Ollie Ricks, what a comeback drive so far from him.
Yeah, and it just goes to show, don't give up, because the race isn't decided until you cross that checkered flag, and even then, with disputes with penalties and things, it can even go beyond that. So Ollie Ricks obviously showcasing that no matter how bad your start was, no matter how bad your qualifying was, the race is where you score the big chunk of points. And at the moment, inside the top 10, that is an impressive display of consistency, of perseverance, and a great display of racecraft as well. Ben Abbott still fighting away with Peters-Ennis as well. Into the pit lane comes Simmons and Maximan, as well as Peters-Ennis as well, getting away from this battle with Ben Abbott. And I'll be interested to see, actually, Nathan Maximan versus Greg Giles would be quite interesting. Of course, the focus was Giles versus Tom O'Farrell, but Nathan Maximan was only about 3 or 4 seconds back on Giles by the time that Giles came into the pit lane, and all that time that Giles has lost might allow Maximan to reel his way back into contention for second.
It absolutely has, because Maximan has retaken to the circuit with Greg Giles behind him. So Maximan is now only, what, a quarter of a second in front of Greg Giles. So that is a brilliant battle. Very well spotted there, Zach. So that is the battle for fourth place at the moment. We are currently looking at Ben Abbott. He's still yet to pit. Once Ben has been in, that will result in the top 4 having all been into the pit lane, and any battling we will see should be good to the end of the race. So Tom O'Farrell ahead of Bobby Simmons, who has been into the pit lane and inherited second place in theory overall, out of the pitters. He is, what, 7.5, almost 8 seconds away from Tom O'Farrell now. So that just shows exactly what Tom needed to do, and he's executed that perfectly. But Nathan Maximan is just about in front of what was Greg Giles. He's clearly had a moment and dropped right the way down the order, because he's gone from 5th place. He's lost out to Jamie Peters-Ennis, Richard Pixley, Ash Hill, and Dan Abbott. So he's back in exactly the same position he was when he retook to the circuit after his pit stop. So what that has in theory done is given Ash Hill and Richard Pixley pretty much a free pit stop, because they've been into the pit lane, retaken to the circuit, and they're still somehow ahead of Greg Giles.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because obviously with a pack racing format, as you can see, Giles immediately on the counter-attack of Abbott, trying to undo what has already been done. Abbott to the outside over, of course, that very high sausage curb on the inside. They, of course, exit onto the pit straight, still side by side. Abbott's going to have to go the long way around at turn number 1. Giles, of course, having the advantage on the inside, but of course, Abbott no strangers, or the Abbotts in general, no strangers to going the long way around of corners. So let's see what he can do. Is he going to be committed? He's going to give it a good go, try and use the sweeping nature. A very fast corner is Redgate here at turn number 1. Runs a little bit wide though, and Giles is able to solidify that 7th place. But yeah, it's unfortunate, but with it being such a high intensity pack race, it's so easy for one mistake to cost you 2, 3, 4, maybe even, as I said a little bit early on, more places than that, and also a bucket load of time to go with it. So Giles, it was maybe just one small mistake, and now he's locked in this battle with Abbott.
Yeah, of course, Greg Giles, he came into this evening, our pole sitter, and it was, I think, what could have been for Greg Giles, a small mistake, and that's dropped him down the order, and then being caught behind traffic, that's dropped him down the order even more. So it really hasn't gone the way of Greg Giles this evening, but he's shown us perfectly, he's showcased his pace and exactly what he can do behind the wheel of one of these EnduroKA. So definitely one to watch, not only for the rest of this evening, but for the rest of the season as well. Having got through and past Dan Abbott, he's almost disposed of Dan and gone, right, okay, you can have a battle with Jamie Peters-Ennis now. I'm going to focus on Ash Hill, who's just a little bit further up the road, who has in turn, I think, fallen away from Richard Pixley. So he's got a bit of a security net to Ash in 5th place. Nathan Maximan somewhat comfortable in what is 4th place, but he is closing up on Bobby Simmons. So Bobby Simmons breaks the beam and posts a 1 minute 34.926. The car behind, that being Nathan Maximan, has just set the fastest lap of the race at 1 minute 33.022. Almost took a full second out of Bobby Simmons up the road on that last lap. So Nathan Maximan, not necessarily one just to watch for the battle that was going to commence, definitely one to watch for the battle that has now commenced, because Bobby Simmons and Nathan Maximan absolutely tied in a battle. They swapped places very briefly, but they're within a second of each other, and this is the battle for the final step on the podium. But of course, Ben Abbott still to pit in 2nd.
Yeah, so of course this effectively becomes a fight for 2nd place. Simmons, of course, trying to spark that title defence with, of course, the rival of Tom O'Farrell. Speaking to O'Farrell last week after his win in Silverstone, was like, I didn't do myself justice last season. I've made too many mistakes. This season I'm coming for Bobby Simmons, and I'm going for that championship. And so far he's done a really good job as to back up that claim. So Simmons, he's got to work hard, and he's got to maximise each and every single point that he can get. So surely for him the bare minimum is going to be 2nd to Tom O'Farrell. But Maximan showcasing that pace late on, this 2nd win that he's got, slowed down a little bit after the initial start and the safety car, but now after his pit stop has just, you know, been born to new life, and he is just a new racing driver entirely. Found so much pace and is now eager. He can see extra points, he can see a step up on the podium, and he wants Bobby Simmons.
Yeah, it's got to be a massive sort of motivator at this stage in the season to know that you've got the pace behind you. It's just that execution that you need to work on. Greg Giles up the inside of Ash Hill. Brilliant move. Nathan Maximan has managed to pick the pocket of Bobby Simmons as they cross the line. Ben Abbott has dived into the pit lane. So now we're seeing that battle that you mentioned, the battle for overall 2nd place into the pit lane. So too goes Ash Hill and Dan Abbott. So Dan Abbott and Ash Hill, the two drivers that we saw battling earlier on there into the pit lane. Bobby Simmons now trying to work his way back up the inside of the wide running Nathan Maximan on the exit of Redgate, but they remain as they are. So Tom O'Farrell in the lead of the race, almost 10 seconds clear ahead of the battle we're looking at the moment. You'd expect that margin just to grow ever further as they continue to battle for 2nd and 3rd place. Bobby Simmons, as we saw last season, as we've seen in the real car, and as we're seeing this season, knows exactly what to do behind the wheel of one of these EnduroKAs to make them go quickly and, more importantly, to win. But Ben Abbott, he has retaken to the circuit in 4th place ahead of Richard Pixley. Richard Pixley will be being hunted down by Greg Giles, but with just over 13 minutes of the race to go, he's going to have to really unlock some pace in that car, will Greg Giles. Retaking to the circuit there is Ash Hill in front of Dan Abbott. He's got Mark Calver for company now. He's trying to work his way through and past and even deeper in towards the top 10. Through the left at Schwann's Curve, we will then arrive at the almost, it's quite a deceptive right-hander at McLean's. It draws you into turn in early. You leave the car out wide and almost pick the apex up halfway around the corner, but Ash Hill somehow finds the grip all the way around the outside. That will put him on the outside for the blind right at Coppice. A very challenging corner. Over the crest we go, and as you mentioned earlier on, you've got to have some very, very brave sort of intentions to find the grip around the outside, and Ash Hill has done exactly that and remains absolutely locked in this battle with Mark Calvert. But with all this going on, look who's just appeared in the background. That is Dan Abbott. He's getting closer and closer as well, and we're 3 wide in towards the S's. Dan Abbott late on the brakes up the inside, 2 for the price of 1. Brilliant move from Dan Abbott. Can't quite make the rest of the chicane, however. That will massively cost his momentum on the exit, so Mark Calvert will draw himself alongside and will try and pick up that place, which I think he will do before we get to the timing line. Yes, we do, but Ash Hill, he's sat there without anything to show for that battle because he's lost 2 places in the space of 1 corner.
I was going to say, yeah, that is unfortunate for Ash Hill, but you can bet your bottom dollar he's going to be immediately back onto the counter-attack, straight away back into the fight. Are they going to run 3 wide through turn number 2 at Hollywood? I think they might well do. These guys putting on an absolutely barnstorming show. Ash Hill once again side by side with Mark Calvert. This is the fight for 9th place, of course. Dan Abbott, after a sensational move now, makes up the rear of this train once again as they run their way downhill towards the old hairpin. Ash Hill outside turns inside for the next braking zone. He's going to hold firm. He's going to take the apex, and he stays ahead, however, creeping his way back alongside alongside Mark Calvert, doing a little bit of rallycross, taken to the grass in order to find the move to the inside. Once again, chucks the move back. What about this is great respect, just about on the limit.
Yeah, somehow they're finding the space on this Donington Park circuit just to keep this battle ignited, and all the way around the outside again, trying to carry that momentum and defend as best as possible is Mark Calver. I think he went for this position and he's still not quite finished the move at the moment, because Ashhill will be on the inside for Coppice. He's later on the brakes, pinches the car in towards the apex. Mark Calver just about keeping it on the road. No, just dips a wheel onto the grass. That washes the cars wide, so it means that Dan Abbott picks up that place. Ashhill reasserts himself into ninth. Dan Abbott for the moment is in 10th, but it may become ninth on the brakes in towards turn 1. Greg Giles has picked up a place on Richard Pixley as he's dived for the pit lane, so Dan Abbott back up into 9th place. What a brilliant battle this is for the final few places inside the top 10. So Dan Abbott in 9th, Ashhill in 10th, Mark Calver left there watching in 11th. Scott Thorne, he's a long way back. But I'm sure he's just hoping for some sort of mistake whilst he's sat there in 12th place, because I'm sure he wants a piece of this as well. Returning to the circuit is Richard Pixley in amongst this battle, because he's just joined behind Mark Calver. So we've got another driver in towards this battle, and another driver hoping to get back in towards the top 10.
Yeah, so even more being added to what has already been such a chaotic battle amongst so many fantastic drivers, and great respect given. Of course, it takes 2, or well, in this case 4 to tango, and you know, it's so easy for things to go so wrong, but yet they've been so close to the limit, lap after lap, corner after corner, giving absolutely everything and just a little bit more, and still keeping it within the confines of the legality of the racing. Dan Abbott once again under pressure. Ashhill is going to essentially die on the hill that he's forged in the form of this 8th place. He is going to defend it with all of his might and try tooth and nail, lap after lap. Less than 10 minutes in this race, a handful of laps left to go, and Ashhill keeps that 8th place.
Somehow they managed to remain on the circuit. A bit of lap traffic slowly starting to pose a problem there, I think, in the background. But for the moment, Ashhill has come away from that one rather comfortably. He's got up into what is 8th place. A bit of lap traffic for him to negotiate as well, but he's put a bit of breathing room between himself and Dan Abbott. Mark Calver does well and truly have Richard Pixley for company in 10th and 11th place. Those two will be battling away. Lap traffic still continuing, I think, to play a little bit of a part in the Mark Calver Richard Pixley battle further down. The battles we saw further up the order have very much dissipated. Tom O'Farrell still leading to the tune of almost 7 seconds now ahead of Nathan Maximan in second. Bobby Simmons has dropped away 2.8 seconds there in third. Then we get back to Ben Abbott, Greg Giles, Jamie Peters-Ennis and James Armstrong. Ashhill, who we've been keeping an eye on, he's still trying to give chase and catch back up to Dan Abbott is trying to catch back up to Ashhill. Mark Calver sat there in 10th place. He's got a fairly equidistant gap up the road and behind to Richard Pixley. And then Scott Thorne rounds out what is your top 12 for now, because we've still got 8.5 minutes remaining, and now we're really starting to see a different side of Dan Abbott, sideways on the apex, heading in towards the old hairpin. A moment left, a moment right, gets it all collected up, but of course all of that scrubbing has lost all the momentum that he so desperately needed, and that opens the door for Mark Calver as we head through the quick left at Schwantz Curve, then in towards McLean's Corner. They do indeed swap around, so Mark Calver up into 9th place, Dan Abbott in 10th, and that's all it takes. Just a small mistake, you scrub off an extra couple of miles an hour, and I think more importantly, at that section of the circuit is all a climb uphill, and if you can come out of the old hairpin 1, maybe 2 miles an hour quicker than the car up the road, that will only expand that it could be 3, 4 extra mile an hour that you have at the top. So Dan Abbott, unfortunately, down into 10th, but Mark Calver, he's managed to pick up 9th just by keeping it on the road.
And that's the thing. And again, we touch on sort of momentum a lot. It's true in every race car, let alone this KA. As we said, only 62 brake horsepower, 109 newton meters of torque. That's not a lot, especially when you scrub off so much speed and then have to climb uphill. Those that are able to keep that high minimum speed, that high apex speed, and get that exit are going to capitalize so much more. And that's why mistakes are punished more in slower cars than they are in the faster ones. Dan Abbott absolutely launching one to the inside of turn number 1 of Mark Calver, who is going to see it coming and keep his nose to the outside. He's been very brave in terms of how eager he is to defend around the outside. Doesn't back out at all, even when he's pushed off the circuit. Nicely done from Calver to keep that 9th place. And all it's doing is actually, for once in this race, giving Ashhill some time to breathe.
Yeah, I've got to say as well, when you see someone like Dan Abbott being so late and so confident on the brakes, it really is something to look at, because these cars, whilst they don't have too much in the way of electronic assistance, they don't have traction control, but they do have ABS. So that almost limits what you can do in terms of braking performance, because you can all reach the ABS. What you do in that ABS assistance is all down to sort of driver technique and driver feel. Do you flick the car in and try and brake as late as possible and scrub the speed on the rear axle, or do you brake slightly earlier, slightly harder, but then carry that momentum through the corner and hopefully expand the margin between yourself and maybe a car behind, or close the margin up the road on the exit, purely because you've done all the braking nice and early, and then you can focus on the exit much earlier. So there's so many different driving styles and driving techniques that can be applied specifically to these EnduroKAs. But as you mentioned, very little power, very little torque, they weigh less than a ton. So you've just got to manage the car and manage what little weight the car has as best as possible. And as we're seeing as well, how much curb you can get away with. Do you use the curb? And if you get it right, be quicker. But if you get it wrong, have to pay the consequences. So it's again, it's that sort of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. You will see it all up and down the grid, just the different driving styles and the different lines that drivers take. Dan Abbott, clearly on the brakes, that's where he's confident. But Mark Calver, for the moment, managing to remain in front.
Yeah, but look at that. He's late on the brakes, but he still gets the exit speed as Dan Abbott. The up and under going into Hollywood gives him the inside for now. He's going to try and edge Mark Calver as wide as he can, just to take that position before they get to the next turning point, and he's done exactly that. Very nicely done for Abbott. Great racecraft, and again, spotting the situation perfectly, predicting the body language of Calver, knowing he was likely going to go in deep because Abbott's forced him to brake even later because he himself is braking later. So Calver, of course, predicting that Abbott was going to try and outbrake him, tries to outbrake the outbreaker, and in doing so went in a little bit too deep. Abbott gets the up and under, and of course gets that 9th place for good measure as well. Now the pair of them back under a second of Ashill, once again fighting for 8th place. Richard Pixley not a million miles away either, just about 1.5 seconds back. But it is interesting to see how many different driving styles there are, how many different ways there are to get that right answer, and how well they are at balancing that very fine parameter of, you know, if you take this much curb, you're perfectly fine. If you take this much curb, you're in the wall.
Yeah, you can just see as well the trust between some of the drivers as well. Mark Calver absolutely pixels away from the rear bumper of Dan Abbott heading into some of these braking zones, trusting that Dan won't brake early, and it's just worked for him. But this time I think he braked just a little bit too late to Dan Abbott, because that meant that Mark Calver got the best run through the S's, and that puts him on the outside for the exit. It will be the inside by the time they arrive at Redgate, but Mark Calver, I think that position might be done and complete as we jump onto the brakes heading in towards Redgate once again. Dan Abbott can't do too much in the way of attack on the way in, but will we see what we saw on the lap prior, attack on the way out? Potentially so, because he closes up immediately, dives to the inside, but can't quite get the momentum that he so wishes on the exit. So Mark Calver back up into 9th place, Dan Abbott down into 10th. Ashill will see this all going on in his rearview mirror. I'm sure the racing driver in him wants him to be part of it, because always being in a battle is great fun, but he just has to focus forward and make sure he doesn't watch that rearview mirror too eagerly, because the race is only going to be out the windscreen from here on out, and that's what he needs to focus on in 8th place. Tom O'Farrell, he is losing time to Nathan Maximan. He's now within 3.8 seconds is Nathan. However, with 3.5 minutes still to go, I think it's just a bit too out of range. However, Tom O'Farrell can still make a mistake. Bobby Simmons still sat there in 3rd place. Ben Abbott is running a fairly quiet race in 4th. Greg Giles has recovered to 5th, and I think that will be the best that he can get out of this one. Jamie Peters-Ennis, that's all she wrote, in 6th. He wants to focus forward and try and pick up places, but 12 seconds up the road is Greg Giles. It won't happen. James Armstrong in 7th, and then we get to this battle. Oscar Abruzzese is just a little bit further up the road, a small piece of lap traffic that you can see there ahead of Ashill. Then it's Mark Calver and Dan Abbott. Don't rule out Richard Pixley. He's been into the pit lane, he pitted later than anybody else. I don't think he took tyres. However, if he does, that means he's on slightly fresher rubber, and he is approaching almost a trio of battling cars, so they will inevitably lose time, and Richard Pixley could find himself inside the top 10.
And naturally, as a chasing car, you almost just see them as 3 positions. You don't necessarily question whether or not you'll be able to overtake them. You just see the gains that are there, are potentially to be had. And as long as he's confident in his stride and knows that how hard these 3 are going to fight, and of course has the racecraft and the ability to carve his way through, time is not on his side though. That's the only problem. It's same true as it is with Nathan Maximan and Tom O'Farrell, of course, who is managing the gap really nicely, knowing that 2.7 seconds in 2 minutes is not really realistic, provided there's no mistake. So Pixley, he's going to have to take each and every single opportunity that comes his way, because there's not really going to be many of them left until the checkered flag.
Yeah, it's all down to pretty much how they manage their race from here on out, and how they've managed the car throughout as well, and how comfortable they are with the people that they've been battling. Thankfully, for the most part, we've seen 1, 2, 3, 4, even more cars fighting within their own little group throughout the race, so that trust will have been built up around the Donington Park circuit. So whereabouts is Scott Thor, or Tom O'Farrell, pardon me? Tom O'Farrell has just crossed the line. We're lapping in the 1 minute 33, so we will get 2 more laps out of this one. So Tom O'Farrell, having crossed the line with just enough time in hand, he has only got 2 more laps of the Donington Park circuit to go. In the background, you can see Nathan Maximan, pardon me, getting closer in second place, but again, just a little bit too far away. I think just dealing with a little bit of lap traffic as we head down the hill. I think that could be Scott Thorne. Just working his way through Craner curves. Bobby Simmons is still, what, 7.8 seconds away, but it's just one small mistake. That's all it takes. Just a bit of a run out onto the grass that kills you momentum, especially on the exit of the old hairpin, and that can cost you so much time. And we are seeing, pretty much as we're watching it, that lead gap come down. But Tom O'Farrell, he might have just eased off. He saw the gap that he had. He's just managing that car to the end, trying to bring it home.
I think so, just driving to a sustainable limit. Of course, he's driven so hard the last 59 minutes and 20 seconds that has been of this race so far. Now he's got a little bit of a margin just to relax and bring it home, minimize those mistakes. I think we've got 1 more to go at the line. So O'Farrell in the driving seat, obviously both literally and metaphorically, 2.7 seconds to gap back to Maximan. As long as he's careful, I think a mistake actually from Maximan. You can see that gap exponentially growing up to about 6.8 seconds or so. So Maximan, yeah, off the road and into second. In fact, actually dropping down to third. He's made an even bigger off than we'd imagined.
Yeah, not quite what we'd expected from Nathan Maximan. I think that could have been a small amount of commentator's curse. Down into 5th now. So Nathan Maximan from 2nd, right the way down into 5th. So Bobby Simmons has inherited 2nd place. Ben Abbott, I'm sure he wasn't quite expecting it. He's up into 3rd, and Greg Giles up into 4th now. So an unfortunate mistake there from Nathan Maximan on the penultimate lap of the race. On the final lap of the race now goes our race leader, Tom O'Farrell. So he will be heading down the Craner curves with a lot of breathing room, 10 seconds worth of it, for the final time. In towards the S's, we now see Ash Hill under more and more pressure from Mark Calver. And Dan Abbott, I think he's just got to bide his time here, wait for maybe the right position and the right opportunity to present itself, which by the looks of it, it has. He will have to go the long way round on the entry in towards Redgate, or will he brake early and then look for the cutback? We know he's good on the brakes. We know he's good for a cutback as well. But Dan Abbott so much later on the brakes. He's trying to find the grip all the way around the outside. This will be the battle for the final, 3 spots in the top 10, and how they will shape up as we cross the line. Ash Hill, he might have got slightly complacent, seeing the cars behind battle, maybe eased off very slightly, and it's meant inadvertently Mark Calver and Dan Abbott absolutely on him. So those 3 cars nose to tail down in towards the old hairpin for the first time, but Tom O'Farrell heading down the back straight, the exhibition straight, for the final time in towards the S's, and the checkered flag is being readied.
It is. He's driven such a phenomenally good race as O'Farrell from pole. He's battled, he's rode the wave, he got the lead early on, and is now going to take victory for the 2nd time in 2 rounds.
Yeah, so Tom O'Farrell towards the line. He does indeed take the win here at Donington Park. The battle's still going on in the background, but hats off to Tom O'Farrell, the first driver to take the checkered flag. Out of this one, Ash Hill still just about remains in front of Mark Calver. Dan Abbott not too far away at all in 10th place, and Richard Pixley well and truly part of this. 2nd place towards the line comes Bobby Simmons. So Bobby Simmons makes it another podium, and Ben Abbott, unfortunately, from what was 3rd place, he's ran out of fuel towards the line. Where will he finish? He's got to put the clutch down and just try and coast the car to the line. Maybe someone will push it by yell. Our director shouting in our ears, but Ben Abbott does indeed cross the line. So Bobby Simmons finishes in 2nd. Greg Giles somehow inherits 3rd place. Ben Abbott in 5th, and he's all going in the background. A massive mistake from Mark Calver, who's fighting away. 8th place, he finds himself crossing the line in 11th. So Ben Abbott finishes in 5th. Jamie Peters-Ennis in 6th, followed by James Armstrong. Somehow Ash Hill comes out with 8th place, having everything thrown at him towards the line. Then it is Dan Abbott who finishes in 9th. Richard Pixley, I said don't rule him out, he rounds out your top 10. Then it is Mark Calver and Scott Thorne crossing the line in 12th. What an end to round 2 here at Donington Park.
You know what, we come off the back of Silverstone, and I was like, that was a really good race, really good way to start the season. And then we get to Donington, and then they just turn it up even more. It's like, you know, they're stretching out the limbs, you know, warming up a little bit through Silverstone, and they were like, we're just going to bring it. We're just going to go to Donington and absolutely send everything. Colin Dunn getting a little bit scared off the road past the checkered flag. But all in all, 60 minutes of action here at Donington, and we didn't have one dull moment. What a race.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And the final car on the lead lap, David Evans. did a brilliant job. What a race that was at Donington Park for round 2 of the EnduroKA Winter Sim Series. I will wait for the confirmed results just so we can run you down through the order in a few moments' time. Of course, these are provisional as well. They may still be post-race penalties applied due to track limits and bits like that, but it's going to be a very tricky one to sum up that race because we saw battles from start to end. Namely with Ash Hill fighting away with Ben Abbott, Dan Abbott, Richard Pixley, Mark Calver as well. The names that you could throw at pretty much the post-race production is endless. And of course, I think one of our favourites and some of the drivers' favourites parts of the night is we can literally ask them. We can ask them what they saw of it. Tom O'Farrell, I'm sure he had a fairly busy start to the race, but the final 30 minutes he won't really have much to talk about. But what a race!
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think there's much more that we can say to sort of do it justice as such. It's almost ineffable as to how good of a race it was. It's almost just go and watch it and it will tell you everything that needs to be said as such. Of course, the interesting thing is that we can make predictions in the commentary booth and use our experience to sort of try and give a bit of insight as to what the drivers are thinking, but 9 times out of 10, we'll then ask them, and then they'll just say something completely different anyway.
Yeah.
So we're never right. We're commentators, of course we're never right. Why would we?
No, we can't be right. We'll say something and we'll be completely wrong or proven completely wrong in a few moments' time. But I think that one of the things to take away from this evening, if you are joining us for the first time or the second time this season, or you've been watching it from the birth of EnduroKA, what an advert for this kind of racing. It shows just how close it can be, and it gives you every reason to come back. And one person that I'm sure will be hoping to come back for the rest of the season, our race winner from this evening, Tom O'Farrell. What a race you had behind the wheel, Mr. O'Farrell. And it seemed like the start of the race rather tense. You had to work for it, got to the lead nice and early, focused on building the gap. And I think the pressure was coming towards the final few laps, but you fended off any sort of attack from behind and crossed the line with another win.
Oh, I feel like I've earned that one. That was, that was quite hard. Both Greg and Nathan kind of had the pace of me, and definitely in the second half, Nathan, I'm assuming he's changed tyres, which is why he was that quick. But yeah, he was coming, and then I just looked in the rearview mirror coming onto that back straight, and he was sideways, and I feel sorry for him because I've been there. I've done a silly mistake like that. But yeah, I was kind of glad to be honest. But as harsh as that sounds, but yeah.
I think one more question from myself before I let Zach loose on you. What is it that makes these cars quick? Because when you look at the power figures and the performance stats, they shouldn't be, but there clearly is some sort of knack which works for some and maybe not so much for others. Of course, we know sort of managing any sort of scrub oversteer, because that's where you scrub your speed, and momentum is an ever recurring sort of prospect in these cars. But is there something maybe slightly deeper into the genetics of the car that you need to master?
You're wanting me to give away my secrets for free, aren't you, Jack?
I
can't be having that. To be honest, it's just keeping the momentum up. Obviously, as you say, don't scrub the speed, but obviously also try and keep your tyres in, because as I say, towards the end of the race, my tyres were struggling. I was about a second and a half off every lap to my start of the race pace. So yeah, just keep the tyres in and yeah, see how that goes. To be fair, it's just finding the balance of the car in the corners as well. You lift off and the back end will start to come around, and that's almost perfect into the corners. But that's as much as I'm going to say before I start charging you, sir.
Perfect. Cheers, Tom. Anything from you, Zach?
Yeah, hi Tom. Of course, obviously we spoke last week and you made a very bold claim in regards to Bobby Simmons, that you let yourself down last season, you didn't do yourself justice, and that you're going to back up that claim and win the championship this season. I have to say, you're not doing too bad of a job so far, are you? You looking to keep that 100% record?
I'd like to, but if I'm honest, I don't see it happening, because Anglesey next, I've not really driven Anglesey. I've probably done about 20 laps, and that was of the larger circuit. I don't see it happening. There's a very competitive field, so I'd like to, but we'll have to wait and see. The one thing I learned from last season was consistency, and that was courtesy of Bobby. He was so consistent last season. Didn't matter whether he got a podium or a win or whatever, it was always up there. Whereas I failed last season, having 16ths and all that sort of thing, and that's where my championship lost. So consistency. I was quite happy taking second if Nathan had caught me that race. So yeah, consistency.
You got it in bucket loads, and you drove a really phenomenally good race. So of course, thank you for joining us, Tom. And well, I'm sure we'll see you back in Anglesey. I know you've just sort of dialed it down a little bit, like, oh no, I'm not quick, but that's every racing driver saying that. You're just getting the excuses out early. We'll see you back in 2 weeks' time when we head to Anglesey.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much. See you then.
Great to have a chat there with Tom. Of course, he definitely knows what he's doing behind the wheel. What we will bring in, or he will bring in, is Bobby Simmons. We can see that he is there. So, Bobby, welcome to the commentary box. After chatting to you last season and sort of keeping tabs on obviously how you were going this evening, it seemed like, are you going for the same approach as you did last season? Consistency, and hopefully that ends up with the championship, or are you maybe trying a slightly different approach this season?
Well, it does look that way. I mean, I sort of, once again, like at Silverstone, I've sort of lucked into a podium. I mean, Ben was catching me at the end, like he was at Silverstone again. He ran out of fuel. Nathan pitted for tyres, which I should have done, but he ran out of fuel. So that was my podium, and then there was a few instances of quicker guys, and I sort of literally just lucked into a second place. I should have been about fifth.
But remember, points mean prizes, and I'm sure you take them where you get them. Zach, I'll pass you over to Zach for a couple of questions.
Well, Bobby, I mean, you're eager for that title defence, I suppose. Obviously, you spoke about how tough Tom is going to be to beat, but you're keeping the consistency there. I mean, 2 podiums in 2 weeks is definitely not bad. But what do you think you need to find just to take it to Tom that little bit more? Because he's just got something at the moment a little bit better than everyone else, and obviously you're a champion. You're not exactly bad behind the wheel yourself. Do you reckon you can find that extra step up?
I'd like to say I can. I was trying to find the pace to Tom all year last year and was still slower than him. But as has been described already, consistency got me the championship last year. I've been trying to just put time in, and it's just not coming to me. I need to have a real conversation with Tom, but obviously he's not going to give me anything to give me speed, really.
Well, no, he's charging with where we've been told for his driver coaching, and we're commentators, let alone competitors. So good luck with that one, I suppose. But yeah, thank you for joining us, Bobby, and I'm sure we'll see you back in a couple of weeks when we head to Anglesey.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'll see you there that weekend as well, then, shall we?
Awesome.
Cheers, Bobby. Thank you.
Cheers.
Great to have a chat with Bobby as always. A brilliant character and very quick in one of these KAs. Zach, what I'll do is I'll let you introduce Greg Giles. I've done both the drivers so far, so we'll bring Greg in, and I'm sure we've both got a couple of good questions lined up.
Of course. So Greg, I suppose a bittersweet race as such. Obviously, you carried in that pole position. Your qualifying results so far this season have been really strong. P3, I think, at Silverstone. Obviously, the pole position here today. You've got the pace, but it's more so, I suppose, for you trying to find that potential, maybe just catching a break with some luck as well. I mean,
it's also racing with the quicker guys is a bit different to where I was sort of last season. Trying to get moves done when you're at full chat is a lot more difficult when you're passing slower drivers. Quali, lots of practice compared to last season. This one, a bit of a luck. I couldn't replicate it again if I tried. It's one of those ones when you just get every corner hooked up.
And of course, the time frame as well, having 3 hours. How much of that do you use?
Of the quali, I didn't use too much. I do a lot of offline practice. I sort of psych myself out if I'm watching everyone's times. My actual fastest lap, I actually did 1 out lap and got it. But like I said, it was a bit fluky. I went back out, later in the session and did sort of 4 or 5 sort of low 33s, which is where I think more realistically I'm sort of pace-wise.
Well, I suppose it doesn't really... sometimes it's better just to not overthink it. The more laps you do, and sometimes you actually get less quality out of them. So sometimes just having that 1 lap is all it takes, really. Well, of course, thank you for talking to me, Greg. I'll let Jack loose on you now.
Yeah, I've got to say, Greg, we were keeping tabs on you throughout the race, and one of the things that I think we try and keep in the back of our minds is pitch strategy, because there's so many different things you can do. You can see a battle starting to commence up the road, so you dive in to minimise any lost time. You can dive in as late as possible, but of course you can give up a bit of time purely by making tyres run a little bit longer into the race. And we can see what you did diving into the pit lane and nice and early, but unfortunately coming out behind some traffic that was battling.
Yeah.
Of course, they've got every right to battle you. It must have been,
It was
quite a tricky job.
Sort of hand forced on that one. You know, me and Tom both had a bit of a bad line through that chicane. I thought I'd just take my opportunity instead of losing the time down the straight and him building the gap back up that I fought tooth and nail to try and get back to him. Just unfortunate rejoining with the traffic where it was. Got bumped a little bit on the way through, but you know, Rubbin's racing and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's what everyone has pretty much got the risk of doing, diving into the pit lane nice and early. But of course, great to have a chat with you. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time at Anglesey, and hopefully we get to chat to you again, similar time, similar place.
Hopefully, I wouldn't count on it though.
Well, fingers crossed, Craig. We'll be keeping tabs on how you're getting on. But like I say, yeah, thanks for talking to us, and we'll speak to you soon.
Cheers, thanks guys.
Bye bye. And I think that's all she wrote for this evening, unfortunately, Zach. It's almost bittersweet come the end of an evening because you've had some brilliant racing, but it means you've got to wait, in this case, 2 weeks before you can do it all again.
Yeah, I know, that's the frustrating thing. I get it, you know, spacing out the calendar as such, but yeah, I just want more. Obviously, off the back of Silverstone, it's like, all right, we've only got a week to wait. We can do that. And now we've got 2 weeks. But thankfully, straight after Anglesey, a week after, we go to 2 races at Snetterton. So we get the 2 disrupted formats back to back, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. Really looking forward to seeing, of course, how the rest of the season progresses, because the potential is there for greatness. We've already seen greatness. I think it's only going to get stronger and stronger from here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely one to be keeping an eye on. So, at least from me, thank you very much for watching. I'm sure Zach shares exactly the same comments. Thank you to Zach for putting up with me in the commentary box this evening. You've actually had to do it this time. Of course, Mike in the director's booth, Burton Power for everything they do for the EnduroKA series, as well as Positive Perception, Gridfinder, and MSVT Racing. They all pull together what a brilliant format and a brilliant formula for some very, very close racing, and EnduroKA themselves as well for showing us how to do it in real life and now in the simulator for a second season 2. If you're watching along at home, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time, same place at Anglesey. Bye bye.
Gridfinder is the home of sim racing leagues. Our management tools allow you to recruit drivers and monitor their ratings and live split. Find this and more at gridfinder.com. Sign up for free today.